go.
Good morning. Let's get started. Welcome to the COVID-19 Manufacturing Recovery and Preparedness webinar series. This 45-minute program is being conducted live on Thursday, May 28th, 2020. I'm John Mitchner, the Economic Development Project Manager for the Port of Bellingham and the Regional Economic Partnership. I want to thank our manufacturing community who have generously offered to support our frontline workers in producing much needed PPE and have kept producing essential products. Because of your quick response and contributions to Whatcom County will emerge out of this crisis stronger. We believe that having a plan to prepare your facilities to restart and developing your capabilities to operate is essential to getting your employees back to work, meeting the needs of your customers. During this presentation, you will learn about prevention measures and commonly overlooked areas of your facility that you will want to address. Additionally, one of the main reasons we wanted to host Impact Washington is that this presentation will also cover how you can obtain a grant that will pay 100% of the cost to have a consultant help you through the process of improving and rolling out safety measures. You shouldn't have to invent these plans on your own. This is a valuable free resource. An interesting side note, the research group Blank Rome published survey results showing that approximately 75% of companies did not have a comprehensive documented plan covering key areas. 12% of these companies surveyed have received formal complaints from staff. Again, you don't have to do this on your own. Also hosting today's call, I am pleased to have online my partners in this effort, Steve Winters, who is our Regional Account Executive from Impact Washington. My compliments to Steve and his team for handling all of the logistics around these meetings. Questions can be submitted at any time. Those on the webinar, you can write a question and submit it using the space provided. Or if you're calling in, you can send an email to swinters@impactwashington.org. That's swinters@impactwashington.org. Once the panelists conclude, we'll get right to the questions and get through as many as possible. Also note, this meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the Port of Bellingham and Impact Washington websites should you want to share it or refer to it again. We will be hosting an additional webinar similar to this one on Thursday, June 4th, so please feel free to share that one as well. Now I would like to turn over to our partner at Impact Washington, Steve Winters.
Thank you, John, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Before I talk about who is Impact Washington, I wanted to remind everyone that we're putting these webinars on through economic development centers and private firms, and all of the content is essentially the same. So if there are partners or suppliers or clients you feel might find this information useful, please direct them to the Impact Washington website for future webinars. Impact Washington is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that offers services and support to manufacturers in the state. We've helped companies to enhance growth and reduce cost and become globally competitive. The Manufacturing Extension Partnership System was established in 1988 through the Department of Commerce. There are 51 of us MEPs, one in each state and one in Puerto Rico. Impact Washington has been around for over 20 years and have helped Washington manufacturing community with retained jobs, increased revenue, and lower cost. And this is all based on third-party surveys. We come from a manufacturing world as owners, executives, operations managers, and engineers. We've been directly engaged with production operations, and we've dealt with many of the challenges that companies are facing now. We, along with our large network of resource partners, are offering support to manufacturers in this time of uncertainty related to COVID-19, providing a no-cost guidance on recovery preparedness for those companies that are continuing or returning to operations. Governor Inslee's office now requires a documented COVID-19 plan for manufacturers to be in place by May 27th. That was yesterday. This plan must be available to all employees. We'll talk about more of the impact of that and the guidance documents and the regulations as we get into the question and answer period. Impact Washington is reaching out to manufacturing community to offer assistance to enable you to continue or return safely to operations. And we're going to talk about a high-level overview of this agenda. We're going to talk about compliance, best practices for keeping your employees safe, employee risk assessment. We want to classify your workers and implement workplace controls, and then minimize the exposure to risk through a decision matrix. We'll go into those in more detail. The NIST MEP Center has received a grant from the CARES Act funding the pandemic response, and we're here to assist manufacturers in this time of uncertainty and changing regulations to continue or resume operations safely and confidently. More importantly, we want to protect your workforce. Now, it's important that not only are your employees safe, but they feel safe. So having a written plan in place will assure them that you're doing the best you can to protect their health. We also need to be sensitive to the needs and challenges of the managers and the owners, and we want to provide counsel and advice using a systematic approach based on best available information. A high-level steps in compliance is we review the existing procedures and we look at your current state. We conduct an employee risk assessment based on their positions in each workstation, and we implement a safety plan based on best practices. We want to review your current state, and we want to assist in developing a facility-wide communication plan and employee support and training. It's very important that you train your employees into the best practices. We want to encourage employees to recognize areas and practices which pose risk for spreading the virus. And health screening has been required by the governor's mandate, and we want to establish guidelines and train employees and visitors on the new COVID-19 related procedures. And we want to limit non-essential visitors from entering your facility. We want to create social distancing, which can be done with procedures or with engineering controls that we'll discuss later. And good health habits. We want to install signage to remind your employees what the policies and procedures are so that they stay healthy and maintain best health practices. Other best practices will be tailored for each site. That's why we do a video chat. We walk through your facility, and then we'll go through a 25-question survey to determine what your best practices are. Entrances and hallways and common areas, we want to look at things like removing door closures where possible and keep doors open so employees are not continually touching the same doorknobs. Employee clock in and clock out practices. The time clock needs to be sanitized after each use. Common tools, things like keyboards, buttons should be sanitized between users, and then sanitize things like brooms, rakes, scrapers, hand tools that need to be sanitized after each use. Shift change. We might recommend that you stagger your days or shifts or shift changes or breaks and lunches to avoid people grouping together. You might order Santa cans with sinks to provide outside tables and additional break areas. With some employees working remotely, determine if any empty offices can be repurposed for segregation of lunch and break areas. Meals, lunch, break rooms. Again, we want to expand or stagger those breaks, and intensify sanitation of things like refrigerator handles, microwaves, faucets, things of that nature. Additional considerations: visitor training, cybersecurity, and signage in place. We have found an increase in cybersecurity with regard to hackers. They're taking advantage of employees that are working from home that don't have the same level of security. And so hacking has increased during this time. To help employers determine appropriate precautions, OSHA has divided job tasks into 4 exposure levels: low, medium, high, and very high. High and very high are generally considered to be medical staff and first responders. Most manufacturing workers are likely to fall into the medium and lower risk, but we'll determine that as we go through the assessment at your facility. OSHA looks at 3 code requirements for workplace safety. The primary one is the general duty clause. The employer has a duty to create a workplace free from risk and hazards to the possible degree. That's a big bucket to fall into. Bloodborne pathogens. Employees need to be safe from any bloodborne pathogens or bodily fluids that may spread the virus, and it's written more towards healthcare and first responders. And then personal protection equipment. PPE is appropriate for the risk in your workplace. We'll help you to determine that based on the risk assessment that we conduct. And then as we conduct a high-level compliance, workplace evaluation is based on exposure risk. There are certain things we can do as far as engineering controls and administrative controls, and then PPE. We want to evaluate things like UV filters and increasing ventilation rates throughout your facility. We want to evaluate separation surfaces to prevent cross-contamination of breathing air. You've probably all been to the grocery store recently, and you see these plexiglass shields between the cashier and the customer. We may need to install certain shields like that in your facility for those employees that cannot be social distances. And administrative controls we've spoken about are things like staggering breaks or lunch times, which would mitigate risk. And then where that's not possible, providing appropriate PPE for your employees. This is an example of a workplace risk assessment form. And we look at engineering controls, administrative controls, and PPE that can minimize the risk to your employee and minimize that risk of contamination. If you are interested in having a no-cost COVID-19 assessment, please contact Impact Washington or the Port of Bellingham, and we will set a schedule to perform the assessment. Depending on the size of your facility, it could take anywhere from 3 to 8 hours to go through that assessment, and then we'll write up a report, and we will give that report to you in an out briefing. Next slide. So at the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, Impact Washington was involved with the Department of Commerce, the Governor's Office, and others serving as matchmakers to identify critical needs and to mobilize manufacturers to produce those goods. We assisted a number of companies in starting to manufacture and tool up for PPE. Now FEMA has established a PPE exchange that is simple to use and can connect private sector sellers with private sector buyers. Amazon.com has also set up a COVID-19 supply site as well, and you can feel free to reach out to us as well feel free to reach out, impactwashington.org. Our team has put a tremendous amount of information on our website regarding to the regulations and guidelines having to do with COVID-19 preparedness. If you are watching this webinar from out of state and you want to email us regarding a COVID-19 preparedness assessment, please let us know which state you are in and we can direct you to the proper manufacturer extension partnership. We'd like to open it up at this point for questions. John, do you have any questions from the listeners?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. At this time, we are not seeing any coming through. If anybody has any, please feel free to type those in or email them in, and we'll get those answered for you.
We've had a number of questions from past webinars. One of the questions that has come up is, do I have to have a written COVID-19 health and safety plan in place? And there's some confusion between the regulations, the requirements, and different entities. The governor's office has required that employers have a written plan and make that available to your employees for review. L&I, however, has not yet required a written plan. So we do have some discrepancy between the two guidelines. However, we would like to go to the more strict guideline because L&I may come and visit your facility, and it's better to have a written plan in place than to not. One of the other questions that's come from a previous webinar is, we're using PPE, masks and gloves, in our facility as a strong recommendation. Are these required for essential businesses? And one of the reasons that we do the assessment is to determine the risk of contamination to your employees. Unless the use of PPE is required based on the determined level of OSHA risk, mandatory PPE should not be needed. However, these guidelines and requirements are changing almost on a daily basis. The governor's office changed many guidelines on May 12th to requirements. So please be aware that these guidelines and requirements are changing and becoming more stringent as the economy starts back up. One of the other questions is, if we require visitors or vendors or suppliers who enter the facility to wear a mask, should we expect them to provide their own mask? We are recommending that they provide their own mask. That way you don't have to worry about decontamination after they leave. More than likely, they're required to do so by their own company. One of the other questions that came up from one of our clients was the employee called in sick because he was vomiting and not feeling well, and then called the next day and said he had food poisoning and he would like to come back to work. The employer was concerned about the possible infection from that employee, so they asked, can we take the employee's word for it, or should we require some other measure? And we recommended that the employer have the employee provide a doctor's note that cleared him to come back to work. We're not medical professionals, so we would prefer to defer to the doctor to determine the health of the employee.
I've got a question, Steve. Just curious, if someone was to contact you, say, this afternoon and was interested in setting up an assessment, do you have an idea what the time frame looks like to get that accomplished?
Sure, good question. Generally, we can schedule a consultant within a week, sometimes even as early as the next day. Many of our consultants are out in the field doing these assessments as we speak. So it just depends on their availability. but generally within a week, we can schedule someone.
And then I sort of a follow-up on that one too. Assessment gets done and people are instituting the recommendations. Is there follow-up in terms of as things change, if new regulations come out? And are we aware of some place where we could be, informed of what's going on?
Absolutely, and good question. Because as the governor's requirements have changed, we've gone back and redone some of the assessments that we did early on to do a second follow-up to make sure that the employer is in compliance with the latest regulations. And those generally take much less time, usually 1 to 2 hours to bring them up to speed to the current regulations. But we do follow up as the employer needs and as the regulations change.
So I'm going to follow up on that question too. I'm just curious, so going through the COVID-19 preparations and response, and as a manufacturing floor gets back to what the new normal is going to be and they get operating, down the road then, would Impact Washington have the capacity if a manufacturer was looking for additional services, maybe with new procedures, there might be an opportunity for maybe some new lean training or something like that. Is that something Impact Washington could do down the road?
Absolutely, and we're always here to help companies do it better, cheaper, and faster, and to maintain global competitiveness. About 75% of the work that we do is lean. We also help companies get training grants through the job skills program system and through the community colleges. We work closely with the community colleges to put together a training package that's customized to your needs. And we're pleased to provide help anytime a manufacturer has any type of requirement and they don't quite know who to go to. We're always available to answer questions. I think we're well connected with like the Department of Commerce and the community colleges and the economic development councils. We may not directly have the answer, but certainly I always say I know who does have the answer.
Yeah, that's great. And I'll just let folks know that it's always been a pleasure working with Impact Washington and seeing the benefits they brought to our community in Whatcom County. Wouldn't hesitate to reach out to them anytime in the future with any questions folks have. I'm still not seeing any questions on the screen here, so if anybody does have anything before we wrap this up, please let us know, and we'll see if anybody has one more opportunity here to ask any questions you might have. Okay, well, not seeing anything here. Do you have anything else you'd like to add, Steve, before we wrap this up?
No, I do appreciate it, John. Thank you for hosting this webinar. And again, any listeners that feel like this could be valuable information, we're going to be doing another webinar next week. And so just have them jump on that webinar or reach out to us at impactwashington.org. There's a tremendous amount of information on our website, and Carol has done a great job consolidating that information and providing it. It's almost a little overwhelming trying to keep up with the regulations, particularly as they change from day to day. But Carol's done a great job of doing that.
So with that, I'll just say, thank you to everybody for attending, and hopefully you gain some valuable information here. If you do have any questions or something comes up later that you'd like answered, please don't hesitate to check out the visit the Impact Washington website and get the information you're looking for there. And also, we'll be doing this again, like Steve said, next week on June 4th, same time, same place, if you will. And please feel free to join again or spread the word to other folks who, if you think they made some benefit from them attending. So thanks again for joining us today, and thanks to everybody who helped put this together. And we hope you're safe out there, and moving forward, we're going to get through this. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.